Hello and welcome to week 4 in the psychology of personality. And I have to tell you, after this trip, a little tired, and I got a cold. So I'm going to see if I can make it through this without gagging or something like that. So bear with me. Here we are in week 4. We're going to be taking on 2 chapters again. The first chapter will be about neo-Freudian perspectives on personality development. These were the researchers after Freud. Now, neo-Freudism continues to this day. It's a continuing development of those theories, but my content kind of focuses on those early years after Freud and what did people do with that. People who were still followers of Freud's basic concepts, but developed them even further. Some very interesting, again, things that have carried on into the modern world. And then we're going to look at the work of Karen Horney. We're still within that psychodynamic world. Karen Horney was the first woman to be certified in psychoanalysis. And that was that broke a ceiling definitively. And we're going to look at her work. And then we're scooting in Erich Fromm, who is a contemporary but has a very, very nearly postmodern look at the personality as it exists within the context of society, which, of course, was a big part of what Karen Horney was talking about, the importance of society. And then we'll see what Fromm had to say about that. So the first person we meet is actually Anna Freud. And there's sort of a tragedy with the Freud family. Sigmund Freud, had, I believe, 5 children and his wife. And they were living in Vienna during the buildup of the Nazi movement, I think. And they escaped. Freud stayed there as long as he could. He escaped and moved to England, where he didn't live much longer after that. I was always under the impression that he lived for quite some time in England, but a couple of years maybe. And Anna was the only one of his family that survived the Holocaust. Everybody else was killed. He's Jewish, and everybody else was killed. So quite a sad story. But Anna, having been the survivor, is the only member, of course, who followed in her father's footsteps and got into psychology and whatnot. And as I mentioned in the last chapter, she took the concept of defense mechanisms and ran with it. Of course, Freud did an immense amount on that, and then Anna's very famous for her work on defense mechanisms. Now, let's talk about defense mechanisms and what they are, considering the personality, the id, the ego, and the superego, according to Freud, most of which is beyond our consciousness, below our consciousness. I mean, we're not aware. We're not directly aware of the id, and for the most part, we're only aware of a very small part of the superego, where mostly our conscious state of mind is our ego. Now, what you have to kind of understand about Freud's analysis is that there's what he calls the manifest situation, and then there's the latent situation. He talks about this when he talks about dream interpretation. It's kind of an easy analogy. You have what's happening in the dream, and then what do those things mean? So, for example, we'll get into this a little bit later, but in dream interpretation, if someone's in a house and they're going around from room to room in their dream, it's generally considered that, yes, it's a house. That's the evident what's going on in the dream. But the latent meaning of that is the house represents the psyche. It has many rooms. And from that perspective, when a room is locked, it's interpreted that an individual is struggling to get in touch with part of their psyche. So that's kind of what we want to think about in terms of defense mechanisms. we experience anxiety and stress, but we sort of think about it in terms of what the ego is aware of. At the same time, some of that stress is interpreted as a conflict between the id and the superego. You're not aware of it. All you feel is the feeling. It's the here's something that I want. Here's something that the society is saying I don't want it. That's the apparent, but then there's this deeper, latent conflict that's going on that causes the anxiety. The ego's job is to protect itself from the anxiety that's going on underneath. So you have the apparent thing that's going on, kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't, rock or hard place. That all these analogies we have for that, and then we have this feeling of frustration and anxiety. And what the ego is really good at doing is coming up with multiple ways of defending itself against that conflict. It can't just sit on that conflict. And because it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation, there's no easy way out of this. So we come up with ways to reduce the anxiety and move on, maybe never actually really resolving the conflict, but we feel better. Now, when we talk about the discussion, I'm going to show you a whole list of defense mechanisms. We could have a little bit more chat about that. But Anna Freud sort of brought that to the table. At the same time, another neo-Freudian, Melanie Klein. And Melanie Klein said she wanted to apply psychoanalysis to children. That's new. But from that, what she started to do psychoanalysis with children, and the psychoanalysis is not psychotherapy. It's all that free association. It's all the having an open discussion, and the therapist is really there to interpret deeper meanings to everything that the person is saying. Now, when you're working with children, how do they express? Now, for one, children are very expressive. They say the darndest things, as they say, right? But still, there are these underlying latent sort of meanings that are going on. And what progressed from that point was the notion that children are free associating. What we talk about when we're looking at adults doing free association, just train of thought, talking whatever comes to mind, good, bad, ugly, all of that. The free association process is play. Just happening, pure expression right from the id and superego. That there may be types of play that represent what's going on underneath. And what emerged from that is what we now call play therapy. Play therapy is a very non-intrusive form of therapy in its modern form, a very non-intrusive form of therapy with children where we simply allow them to play. And although there's a faction within play therapy that interprets what they're doing, interprets their drawings, interprets the kind of play that they're doing, there's also a faction that says, just let them play, let them express whatever they want, and on the other side, they'll have worked out all on their own, being the incredibly cognitively and psychiatrically resilient beings that they are. Children are incredibly resilient. They'll work it out. And the form of play therapy that I'm just talking about, so the most common version of that play therapy doesn't get into the interpretations of what's going on in the id and the superego, but recognizes that that's what's being expressed. The child is working through it, and when they get on the other side, their mechanisms are going to take care of whatever anxiety it is there. And this has actually been shown to be incredibly effective. Play therapy is an incredibly effective approach for kids that have been through trauma, for kids who have been through loss, for kids that have been bullied, any one of those things. You bring children into play therapy, and through that process of playing, they work it out within themselves and sort of get out of their way and let them do that. The other concept that comes up, certainly a Freudian concept, he wrote and discussed it extensively, but it comes up here as object relations. And object relations has meaning in defense mechanisms, and it has meaning in play therapy. It also has a very strong developmental quality to it. Now, when we go through the processes of building social relationships, we attach to individuals. We learn to trust them. We learn to tell them what's going on. We learn to recognize that they will be there for us and whatnot. But as with many things, relationships have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And so that sort of capacity that we have to attach to things, there's a lot of it. So we attach to people, but sometimes we attach to non-people. We attach to a blanket like Linus from the Peanuts strip, or we attach to a stuffed animal or to a pet, and we have strong emotional connections to those things. And you'll see that children often do this. So early in life, they have so many, it's like all these lines are going out and just looking for people to attach to, and they'll develop these attachments and whatnot. But if you're cleaning out the attic, okay, and you take out a box and you open it up, and it's all your stuff from childhood, and you can't really just throw it away, probably because you still have some emotional attachment. You still have some object relations going on. That's sort of the lived experience of that. Excuse me. So, chapter 5 discussion. I want you to discuss and provide examples of defense mechanisms. Now, what I've done, I found as I was reviewing my course book that the resources that I gave on that were pretty slim. Didn't even really have a discussion. So I started doing a little bit of research for this video and found a really neat, one-page summary of a whole bunch of the defense mechanisms that I will probably incorporate into the next edition of the course book. But I've given you a direct link to that document. So if you go into the course timeline, and this is from the course here, and you scroll down here to week 4, you'll notice there's a new link here. I put in types and definitions of defense mechanisms. So you click on that, and you'll get this document here. Zoom that a little bit. You see repression, denial, regression, projection, splitting, isolation of affect, and you'll see what it is, and you see an example. So you can use this as a resource for developing an understanding and to participate in that particular discussion. Yay. Now, there's also talk, there was in the course book, there's also, you'll see there's ways in which we apply defense mechanisms both functionally and dysfunctionally. So you can look at that too and say, okay, maybe I did denial once, but I really needed some time to heal before I could deal with the consequence of a loss. So I phased it out for a while. Freud felt that was very, very constructive. And then there are ways in which that we develop defense mechanisms that can be also very positive and use them very functionally. So that there's a little section in the course book about that. Now, what we also have is a quiz where I want you to talk about object relations. And like I said, sometimes it's pretty slim in the resources that I provided for you. So feel free to go outside the class and use those resources. And I'm asking you to kind of define object relations and maybe give an example from your life of an object that you had emotional attachment to. like maybe a non-person object of some kind. Okay, so we get into chapter 6. Karen Horney and Eric Fromm. Now, Karen Horney, again, the first woman to be trained as a psychoanalysis, psychoanalyst. That's it. Um, so she wanted to confront Freud about his, you know, backwards ideas about men being superior to women and all that stuff. And she was, when we think about the times when she broke into this men's club and that she was writing things against, she was a woman liberator. I mean, she was a powerful individual, very very profound in terms of helping women get recognized as equals here. Things get a little dicey here. We start talking. Remember, she's still a Freudian. She still believes in the psychosexual development, and we get the Oedipus complex. She brought up the Ophelia complex. We had penis envy. She brings up with womb envy. These kinds. She's still in this sort of area that's certainly today we kind of find it hard to kind of get our heads wrapped around why people would think that way. But she was definitely moving things in a positive direction. Now, she talked about people having personality types way before we had any testing or anything like that on personality types. She basically thought there was three. There's one, the first one, compliant, sort of rubs us the wrong way too. I'm not compliant. I'm not just do what people tell me to do. But compliant was the positive one, that would gravitate toward people in order to make connections with others. Then you have aggressive personalities. Those are individuals that want to control and manipulate others. And then there are detached individuals that move away from other people. So that was kind of what she brought to the table, this idea of personality types. Her thought was the basic drive was toward self-realization. And we can take that self-realization, and I think it's kind of equivalent to Maslow's self-actualization. You want to be the person you can possibly be. It's just an early rendition of that. Not within the same context, but certainly the same goal for us to be who we can be. And it also, because she was very into the effects of culture on human personality development, she winds in there a really neat concept of us being very aware of the expectations of important people in our lives. And there we go. On a silver platter, we have looking glass self. Essentially, important people in our lives that we've selected, or they've been selected for us, but either way, we feel an emotional attachment to please them. They are the mirror by which we judge ourselves. And we have these early foundational thoughts that we're going to see later when we talk about looking glass self. Now, because Karen Horney talks so much about culture, the day that philosophies about modern society, which is pretty much the advent of these theories, are coming in modern, mechanization of things, not anything as extensive as today, but certainly there were people who were perceiving that the mechanization of our society was creating, much more leisure. We would think that that would be a good thing, much more freedom to do whatever we want. But Fromm said that maybe there's a dark side to that. Now, this is interesting. The whole idea of mechanization producing freedoms, it really comes out in the work that I've done in human performance engineering, where you have the concept of the individuals, the thinkers of the Industrial Revolution. Not the players, the thinkers, the philosophers that we're looking at said, we need to mechanize as much production as we can, because this kind of work, putting things together and drilling bolts, that's beneath human dignity. That's beneath us. We are these wonderful, this very humanist, very Maslowian, Maslowian. I just made that up. This Maslow type idea of self actualization, and spending 8 hours in a factory is just horrible. So there's a strong philosophical emphasis during this period of time, and certainly today, to free humans from the drudgery of work. But as his uncle told Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. So when we have these powers, we have this freedom, what do we do with them? And Fromm felt that there might be some issues with this. So he felt that individualism and freedoms of the modern society undermine us. In fact, so much so that we continue to be attracted to and gravitate to organizations, people that will tell us what to do. So the drive toward churches or political parties or clubs or anything like, give me some structure. And he felt that that structure, provided that it was a good structure, was really how we wanted to live. That too much freedom was really not as good for us. It provided us with we became alienated from our work, from our society, our responsibilities of humans, other people, stuff like that. Okay, so that comes down to, we have 2 discussions and 1 quiz, very similar to last week. We have the first discussion, you look at Horney's types, what are you and what are some examples? Share on that. The second discussion, is freedom a problem? We're going to get philosophical on this. Is freedom a problem, or do we seek constraints? We know with children, if we take children and we put them in a room and just let them do whatever they want to do, eventually you're going to have to step in and stop somebody from bleeding or something like that. Things get a little out of hand, and that they perform much better under a set of rules. As long as they're not too stringent, they actually thrive in those rules. How does that apply to adulthood? Do we thrive better when there's some constraints? And what are those constraints? And who should define them? You can probably see where that rabbit hole is going to go. I expect you guys are going to explode on that one. Okay, now, in the process of self-realization, Horney identified 3 processes: perfection, ambition, and triumph. Those 3 processes, of self-actualization, becoming expert at something, becoming reaching an ambition, winning in a competitive type environment, a triumph, or accomplishing something like that. How does this relate to your motives and people's motives around you? That's the quiz. I'm asking you to discuss that in the quiz. So we have a big week again. We have 2 chapters. We have chapter 5 discussion, chapter 5 quiz, 2 discussions for chapter 6, and a quiz for chapter 6. So, but fun stuff. All of this, keep in mind, we're just reaching the edge of the psychodynamic world. Very, very influential early part of the study of personality, all starting with Freud. All right, so that's this week. Have a great week. I made it without coughing. I'm going to start coughing as soon as I stop. And have a great week. I'll see you in the discussion boards, and take care.